Hey friends, welcome back to Huge Head Studio. My name is Robbie, and it's officially time for Easter, which means it's obviously a great time to sculpt Kratos from God of War. Does that make any sense? Hell no, but nothing about Easter makes any sense, and I want to sculpt Kratos, so Easter Kratos it is. If you somehow don't know who Kratos is, he's basically one of the grumpiest and most violent dudes in history. He's the demigod son of Zeus and Callisto, born and raised in the brutal warrior culture of Sparta. He's a guy who looked at an entire pantheon of gods and thought, yeah, I can take them, but then he actually did. His life has just been one unfortunate event after another, which eventually turns him into a full-blown rage machine. Every problem he faced was solved with violence. Minor inconvenience? Violence. Major life crisis? More violence. And he did all of this while wearing sandals, which is just wild in my opinion. But somewhere along the way, Kratos got a second chance at fatherhood after the first didn't go so well and went from unstable god-killing machine to just a very tired, very grumpy dad. Which is exactly why bearded dad Kratos is my favorite version of Kratos. Because underneath all the fighting and chaos and yelling boy, there's actually a dude trying to be better than he used to be. As a father myself with two little monsters running around my house, who I adore by the way, it just feels very relatable. Not the god-killing part, just the being tired and slightly annoyed all the time part. Anyway, for this sculpt I'm doing a caricatured version of Kratos from the latest God of War games. So to get started, I built an armature wire skeleton and then slowly layered in bits of polymer clay as I try to figure out the muscles and proportions for this exaggerated character. Once I got a decent base layer of clay on, I got started on the hands, which I want to finish and attach before building up the arm muscles since they're the first real detailed element of the sculpt and everything else will kind of build off of them moving forward. You'll notice that I'm using two different colors of polymer clay throughout the sculpt. The white is original Sculpey, which is soft and easy to move around, while the beige clay is super Sculpey, which is really firm and holds its shape a lot better. There are plenty of different types of polymer clay out there, but I typically use Sculpey because it was the first polymer clay I ever tried, and I'm hard-headed, so once I find an art medium I like, I struggle to try anything else. For example, in one of my first art classes I ever took, I would only use mechanical pencils to draw. The teacher accurately felt that I was limiting myself and forced me to break the habit and try new things by only allowing me to draw with a tennis ball dipped in ink for a week or so. I hated every second of it, but it worked because eventually I gave in and tried colored pencils and then refused to use anything else for a few years. Then later in college I was forced kicking and screaming to learn how to paint with acrylics, which naturally became my new favorite thing. And now of course here we are. I've abandoned 2D art entirely for this journey into sculpting. But staying true to form, I've latched on to Sculpey and I'll probably be here for a while. Anyway, I like to use Super Sculpey for the detailed areas and for anything that's intended to feel like a hard surface. I want these muscles to look like the solid, carved muscles of a demigod and not soft and doughy like mine. Then I use the softer clay for anything that requires a lot of movement and blending. I also like to bake as I go to lock in the progress, and sometimes I don't pay attention and just burn the absolute out of it. Haha, isn't that wonderful? Alright, ain't nothing but a happy little accident, and with a few steps of sanding with increasing grits of sandpaper we work out the burn and it's good as new. With the muscles mostly done, I'm ready to add the feet and then get started on building up his pants. Younger Kratos didn't wear pants, but instead opted for a Spartan style skirt as he waged war on literally everything, which is pretty dope in my opinion. Like, imagine being a medieval knight covered head to toe in a suit of armor and then this guy rolls up ash white and just absolutely yoked wearing nothing but a tattered skirt and some open-toed sandals. Yeah, I'd be scared, no doubt. But older Kratos left Greece, or was taken from Greece, or something like that. I don't really know the lore for sure, but somehow he lands in Midgard, where he apparently figured out one of the true joys in life, which is a good pair of fat pants. And even with the addition of pants, he is still apparently opposed to shirts, even though the Norse lands are a bit more brisk than his homeland. He does wear more armor and furs in the newer games, but before I get into sculpting that, I want to finish the head first so that I know how it's going to sit and I can make sure the shoulder armor doesn't get in the way. Early versions of Kratos before the beard had a very sharp face. All of his features were very blocky and chiseled with almost no softness. He also had that sharp little goatee, and honestly he kinda looked like a more sculpted, angry version of the Salamanca twins. But in the Norse version of bearded dad Kratos, his features have softened a bit. The cheekbones aren't quite as sharp and his face definitely looks more wrinkled and experienced. Homie just straight up looks tired. My intention here was to kinda give him a mix of the old version and the new. I like the sharp cheekbones from the earlier games, but I also like the tired and bearded look of the newer Norse version. But I'll be honest, I like how most of this sculpt turned out, but I am not a fan of the face, and I believe the problem is with the eyes. I had some pre-baked eyes lying around from a previous project and I thought, hey, These are already baked and ready to go, and I'm lazy, so I'll just use these. But they're way too big for this face. Yes, it's a caricature with exaggerated features, but it only works if the features that are exaggerated make sense for the character. Kratos isn't exactly known for having big old bug eyes, so including them here throws it off a bit. But with literally every art project I've ever done, I've found at very least one thing that I don't like and that could be improved on. Mistakes are lessons learned, and self-evaluation and constructive criticism can lead to improvements on the next project. Also, it's not like this is the worst version of Kratos floating around out there. That first shot of Ryan Hurst as Kratos for the live series sure is something. Looks like Will Poulter doing a cosplay. Anyway, once I get the head and beard built and set onto the body, I finish up the muscles on the back so that I can finally add his clothing and accessories. I start by pressing a pattern into some rolled out clay to make the different layers for his shoulder armor before adding the fur that goes underneath it. I said clothing a second ago, but clothing is a strong word. It's really just a few strips of fur here and there tucked under the various straps and other leather bits. Even though he's now in a colder climate, I guess Kratos is truly dedicated to the philosophy of suns out, guns out. Next, I roll out some more clay and then pull at it to give it a frayed look and then cut it into strips to create the remnants of a Spartan skirt that he wears over his pants. After that, I tear off a bit of clay and wrap it around his waist to create the leather loincloth looking thing and then add a belt on top of it. I also add a little butt pouch and then move on to the axe. I use a simple dowel for the handle and then roughly sketched in the shape of an axe on a piece of scrap paper to help me get the sizing right, and then cut it into a flat piece of clay and baked it and then sanded it to give it an edge. With that done, the sculpt is done and we're ready to move on to paint. I kick it off with a gray primer coat to give it a flat base to build off of, since we use two different colors of clay throughout the figure. After that, I lay in another flat layer of a beige skin tone to use as an underlayer for Kratos' ash white skin. The underlayer can help us give it some depth instead of just leaving it flat white. Also, if you were unaware, his skin is ash white as punishment for going into berserker mode back in the day and accidentally killing his wife and daughter. So his skin is literally coated with the ashes of his deceased family, which is just truly unfortunate. I decided I wanted to redo some of the shadows with my airbrush, but I didn't want to repaint the eyes, so I used some liquid mask to protect the eyes while airbrushing and then scraped it off once finished. I then used a ball stylus to add the color to his iris and then added some reds and yellows to break up the flat white color. Next, I laid in a base layer of black for his beard before applying a few different dry brush coats of lighter colors to give the beard some color variation. Then I continued pushing the ash-colored skin tone by adding highlights to all the high points on the body, trying to make him look good in fish belly white, just like my wife. From there, I focused on finishing out all the different parts of the torso, working from the bottom layer to the top. Personally, I prefer painting my figures this way whenever possible. In this case, the bottom layer is the skin, followed by the fur, and then the top layer is all the leather armor and straps. I don't have the steadiest hand quite yet. I'm still working on it, so I tend to make little mistakes here and there, and in my experience I found it's easier for me to minimize these mistakes working the layers in this order. For example, if I detailed the leather straps first and then painted the fur, there's a good chance I'd slip and get the dark brown all over the lighter leather. Is that the end of the world? No, but in my opinion it's easier to paint the fur first, and if I get paint on the straps, it doesn't matter. I'll just cover it up when I go in with the base layer for the leather. Same thing with the red here over the pants. I could have painted the red first, but I think it's easier to detail the lowest layer without having to worry about slipping up and painting over the layer above. Is this the best way to go about it? I don't know, I'm self-taught. I have no idea. Probably not, but hey, it's worked for me so far, and I reckon that means it's good enough. Once the bulk of the flat layers have been laid in, I then go around and add little details here and there as needed, including all the stitching on his loincloth and all of the different leather elements of his fit. I dot on some little gold details onto the red strips because, I don't know, it seemed like a good idea, and then I move on to his axe, which I paint with a few different tones of metallic paint. I do the same with the bracer on his arm to highlight its wear and tear, and then move on to his iconic red tattoo, which isn't just some random meaningless design like cybersigilism, but is actually a tribute to his brother meant to resemble his birthmark. While the tattoo dries, I add some UV resin to his eyes and cure it to give them a glossy look, and then dab some pan pastels over the red of the tattoo to tone it down a bit and make it look a little faded. And with that, Kratos is ready to sit on the shelf and grumpily stare at me while I work. Well, as always, I appreciate you watching, and I hope you enjoyed this little project. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to see what we make next time. Also, if you have any project requests, let me know in the comments. I am always open to suggestions. But that about does it for now, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.